I'm delighted that a financial director's resident tech columnist, Peter Cochrane, who is far more than just that, he's also the former Chief Technology Officer at BT and now a consultant at Cochrane Associations, is going to chair the panel. And I hand over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to do all that in 30 minutes, so you'll be able to go home happy. Gee. I'm going to quickly introduce my panel, and I'm going to do it very lightly because all the information about them is in the book. They've got a tremendous amount of experience and depth, far more than me. So Faye and Lena, Workaday and CCA, we're in an interesting situation. I've been CTO, CEO, CIO, but never a CFO, and I've spent a lot of my life trying to understand CFOs. And the world has changed from the fiefdom of finance to cooperation and trying to get things to work as a team. So my number one challenge has been the technology, and I've put up on here just a few of the technologies that are impinging on all others. And perhaps the most common ones that have been hurting are things like bring your own device, be my own boss, big data. But in the background, we've got material science, nanotech, biotech, and it's all changing the scene. The Internet of Things is an essential for a sustainable future, and it's rolling out, and we're doing it at faster and faster speed. So here's my spectrum of speed. The legal system is like the world we used to inhabit 50 years ago. Things are slow, stable, time to consider, you can consult, there are case histories, and there are precedents. Accelerate down to the bottom right, where we are in the technology sector, and we find ourselves with a very interesting situation. For the medics, the half-life of information and knowledge is about 3 years. For technologists like myself, it's less than 6 months. If I was to take a year off, I couldn't get back into my job. This is tough. The world is no longer simple and disconnected. It's connected and it's complex. And we get emergent behaviors. Now, we either try and resist all of this, or we adapt, and we adapt real quick. And the problem is there are lots and lots of simple solutions to really complex problems, and the snag is they're all wrong, as has been demonstrated this week. I know people who have voted on Brexit because they didn't like the colour of somebody's hair. That level of sophistication will not work in a complicated world. So if I was to talk to any of you, I would very quickly get to the point of what's killing you and information. I remember in BT taking down the board's paperwork of about 60 pages of financial information and reducing it to 3 graphs that were understandable. We have got raw data, lots of it. We've got metadata. We've got small data. We've got big data. What we need is some big understanding, and that is the challenge. And I'm going to put it to you, the complication of the world now is way beyond the human brain. It is beyond people's ability to understand the complex systems. And we need some help from the machines themselves, which has helped us create this situation. So this is my view of you and your life, and that of many other C grades, where we're just struggling to keep on top, keep ahead. And so my first question before I sit down to my 2 panelists is, in your organizations, what tools and techniques are you investing in to help us deal with this rapid change engendered by technology? How would you like to fix?
Thank you, Peter. So I'll probably kick it off so by means of introductions. I know I would encourage everybody who's interested to connect through LinkedIn and study the profile, and we can continue the conversation. So I've been working in the technology sector for the last 10 plus years. And, you said you were studying the life of CFOs, and my journey, I guess, and before I was in consumer and retail for an equivalent amount of years, maybe a bit less. And I was really fascinated at some point in my career about the whole kind of technology. I didn't really understand it very well. I wanted to be relevant. And I think I was just lucky to get into the industry at the time when the industry can really change the way the business is growing or the way the businesses are evolving. And what I really like about my job is, being next to the CEO or managing director, and these are my great business partners that I work with across the regions and different geographies and lines of business, is to really support the growth. And that's very high on the CEO's agenda, is still the growth. Maybe less so cost avoidance or cost efficiency, so that kind of becomes my job to maintain that. And also the leveraging technology is another kind of high on the radar theme. And with all of this come innovation and people. So if you think about the job of the CFO, and again, I'm coming from the software world, licensing world, and services world, so you really need to have end-to-end integrated financial tools to really run the business. If we think if we think about the hypergrowth, and Workday is a fast-growing company, it's not really a startup, so it's over a $1 billion company, which is public and which is a very significant play in the enterprise space. You need to enable that growth with the tools that you have. So we use our own systems, which is cloud, finance, and HR. And I think the reason that we are who we are and what we use as tools that actually enables that growth, enables cost avoidance, and enables the finance transformation almost like at the end of it. I'm not sure whether we're going to discuss the finance transformation in a bigger detail, but I've been through finance transformation over the last 7 to 8 years. And when I joined Workday, I just thought that's the end state of what everybody was trying to achieve, and why we're still struggling with, with being the true business partners, with adding or bringing finance skills back to the business is because technology sometimes does let us down. So that's kind of my view.
Before I turn to Faye, let me ask you a question directly. Are you investing in wargaming and decision support in any way?
Sure, yeah. So as I said, we grow double-digit year over year. We really trying to be prudent about the growth because we don't really want to blow up the infrastructure or blow up the investments. The investment areas that we're betting our future on are international business, which is again one of the top priorities of any CEO out there. So our European business and APJ business is growing very fast. And with this comes the investment into the product, the investment into the localization, into the customization of certain modules, the partnerships in different markets where we will not go direct, or with certain functionality where we'll not go direct. And a really, really big bet, which is relevant for this audience, is financials. So we started financials at the same time when we started HR, which was 2005. What we saw is that HR is picking up better, or was picking up better for the cloud solutions. It was more open to the cloud. And now we saw a huge wave, and maybe even not the tipping point yet, but reaching to that tipping point of cloud financials. And I just recently read Gartner report of last year, their kind of outlook on 2018, and the numbers are quite impressive. So they say that 25% of core financials implementations by 2018 will be cloud financials. They also did say that 40% of organizations would have some sort of integrated HR and finance end-to-end processes and systems. And I think that's quite fascinating. This is what we do. So the investment areas are international business and growth, investment into the product and the local specifics of the regions where we want to grow, and big-time financials in the overall platform.
How about your business, Faye?
Well, I'm going to speak about ACCA. For those that know ACCA, we're a professional body of professional accountants. I'll speak about ACCA as an organization, then I'll also provide you some insights in terms of where we see the CFO and where the finance professionals are moving towards. So at ACCA, I'm a head of futures research. What I do at ACCA is that we tend to look a little bit more forward in terms of what's happening and to ensure that the profession still remains relevant and make sure that we still have jobs. As most of you would have heard, a couple of years ago, there was a study by Oxford University that said the number of jobs or the number of auditors actually declined. How many have actually seen that report or read that report or heard that report? Not many. Oh, wow. It was all in the FT. It's basically saying the auditors were probably one of the roles, one of the professions that was at risk about being obsolete with advances in technology. I see some shakes of head, which is great to hear, which is great to see. So at ACCA, just give you a background in terms of how we use technology. We use technology in many firms, all the way from big data, all the way to metadata and small data. But not just looking at what we have, but also looking at external environments of our environment. And it's also looking at more softer data. So example, looking at where are the student growth is happening across the world, where are the new pockets of growth that's happening. As a professional body, we always make sure that we're constantly growing. So that's the way we've looked at it internally within ACCA, whether it's with social media, whether it's through Facebook. So we've accumulated all of that information. But of all of that, it needs to be audited. Because I think one of the biggest concern of using so much data, which you mentioned earlier, Peter, is a data overload. So it's how do you ensure that that quality is actually good? Is it good data? It's like, what's the provenance of that data? So there's a lot of efforts that are actually being put behind on provenance of data. In terms of where the profession is going, yes, technology is changing, and it's a massive disruptor, as I call it, in the world today. But the way we think and the way we see the profession moving forward is how do they actually use that technology, as Lena mentioned earlier, is how do you use that technology to enable us as finance professionals to take that next step up? And that's the big question. So it's not just looking at technology, what's available today, but actually looking at technology in the future. How could that help my business, or how could that help the society at large? So for us at ACCA, it's looking at how to use technology to leverage yourselves. At the same time, it's looking at new technology, not just using the existing technology, but actually having a curious mindset to see what else is out there.
Can I tease both of you now? And this is going to sound arrogant, and it is. Not purposely, but by and large, it's actually very difficult for non-scientific people to understand technology, to understand fully the implications. And I think in some businesses, it's even quite difficult to fully understand the motivations of the customer and the customer model. In the opposite direction, I think most engineers can slip into the financial function more easily. However, I will lay at the foot of my profession something that drives me to distraction. They're probably the most incapable people when it comes to communication that have ever been bred on the planet. Don't ask an engineer or a technologist to describe to you what something is or does. How do you cope with the speed of change, the speed of technology? And it's the implications that fascinate me, that the customers are doing stuff, the people you employ are doing stuff that were unintended. And they take you by surprise, and it shows up on the bottom line. And you don't know it's coming until it does. So a good example is security. Companies spend a fortune trying to prevent security breaches. I go in and do security audits, and they've got some kind of infection, and the first thing I see is lots of tablets and other things that are not approved by the company. In fact, the IT department have banned them, but the people who are being employed don't give a fig. They're not going to obey the rules. And so this stuff is happening. How do you cope in your companies? Have you got regimented people and a slow pace of change, or are you very slightly out of control like the rest of us?
Oh, God. You have so many questions in one. I'll probably pick up the, I think the one that came at the beginning, which is about the education, how you educate yourself. Again, it was a purposeful choice for me to get into technology with my finance background. I couldn't understand a lot what the people were saying, like at all, even on the sales model or pre-sales or architecture or anything. And I just realized that that step of getting yourself out of the comfort zone to that extent is actually very exciting, because the amount of what you can learn, you know, talking to engineers, talking to the architects, talking to the consultants is fascinating. And what then really was encouraging is learning the customer stories and understanding and comparing, and also finding that not every customer is the same, and even is the same industry, the same country. Every customer is so different, every prospect is so different, and it's fascinating to see how we can actually leverage those differences in a unified way, if you like. One of the biggest learnings, and that may be why I'm now in the cloud computing industry, is when the whole world emerged with mobile, cloud, and in memory. I really took a few steps further, and I worked on one of the M&A integrations for that particular purpose, is to understand what is it all about, and just, I think that was a bit of a time invested with some practical applications to get out there.
Faye?
Yeah.
Well, to answer your question, there were a lot of questions there, so I'm going to pick
Well,
the questions
I
that I will.
purposely said I was going to tease you.
So it goes back to Lena's point about customers, and goes back to how do we actually ensure that we are still relevant in tomorrow. I'll give you a stat as a researcher myself. Apparently there's 9 out of 10, on a survey that was done earlier this year, 9 out of 10 think that customers have the biggest impact on their strategy. That is an astonishing number. That's 90% of people saying that customer has the biggest impact on their strategy. So how are you going to reach out to your customers? And again, there are many tools out there. And it's not just, you don't have a silver bullet solution. There isn't one solution. So the way we look at it at ACCA is that there's a set of skills or qualities that each finance professional or CFO will need in the future. So it's building on our technical as well as our ethical capabilities, as well as need some creativity. How do we communicate, and how do we communicate to a wider audience? Having a vision, being digital, and most importantly, actually having emotional intelligence. How do you relate, again, to people within the organization and outside the organization?
We're going to get something really happening soon that's going to be fun. The Internet of Things is going to turn this around, and you're going to get all the information about what the customers are doing with your stuff and products. Let's turn to the audience. Has anybody got a question, a burning question that they'd like to throw at the panel at this point? Okay, no hands have gone up. Or Richard?
I'll throw it in. I just wondered, all this evolution, what does this mean for the ways business have to actually assess their performance? You say it's all about the customers, and business will always be about the customer. But with, you know, these new kind of, whether it's different forms of data or intangible values coming through, how does it change the way businesses assess performance? And that's for Lena and Faye.
I can take that first if you don't want. I think the way we actually assess and put value towards intangibles will be a challenging exercise. It's not going to be easy, to say the least. How do you actually put a value on, for example, on data? Or how, you know, we can put a value on somebody's brand at the moment, but how do you actually put value on intangibles would be very difficult. However, they cannot be overlooked. That's my only way of actually saying how I could actually say its importance, but it's very difficult to put a price on intangibles. It should be looked at and it should be taken seriously. However, how does one measure it is yet one of those things that people do scratch their heads for answers.
Yes, from my perspective, I'm a true believer in the core financials KPIs, and time again, it's been proven it's about the cash, it's about the working capital, your revenue, your bottom line, and the balance sheet. However, I think when I look at what's happening in the industries across and what's happening in the world, and analyzing my own experience with, as I said, retail, consumer, then management consultancy now, software, it is actually people is the greatest asset. And how you build the systems and the structures and the processes about recognizing your talent, promoting your talent, recognizing the needs for development, succession planning, and how can you actually quantify all this soft and fluffy data which used to be maybe less relevant for the finance director? How do you actually quantify and then drive the forward-looking decisions, where do you go with probably the most important asset that you have? And I think the second point on this one is that whole embedded analytics and forward-looking piece, which I think we are trying to resolve for our own finance functions, is really, really critical in the future.
In your genetic makeup is a word that you can't get away from. It's called optimization. You're tempted all the time to squeeze much as you can out of the system. But every single system that is optimized is brittle. It does not live very long. So a good example would be the Formula F1 racing car, supremely efficient, not very reliable. Mercedes E-Class, very inefficient, runs forever. How do you strike a balance in your companies between squeezing the last out of the situation, satisfying the investors and the markets and the board, whilst keeping the company alive for the long term? How do you do that?
So, as I said, I'm a true believer in the core financial KPIs and what's behind the real kind of business fundamentals, and having the finance discipline to manage those KPIs in a consistent way is really key. We are a true believer in the cloud infrastructure, what would drive the business efficiencies in the future. And, I worked on the legacy system side of things, and now it's, very modern and picking up. If you think about the investment we, for example, do into the security, into the architecture, which is one single version, everything on one line code, and it's one custom community, it's one security model. So it's really challenging to see the companies investing, or individual companies investing to the same scale. And I guess that will drive efficiency, particularly in IT spend or operation expense spend in the future. And then, as I mentioned before, managing talent is really ultimate for anything we do out there, because we don't know what's coming with those new generations.
Absolutely.
Well, as you all know, businesses are always constantly driving to drive its efficiencies. But at the same time, I think if I could give a word of advice, is just to be absolutely agile in the way you actually do work and actually how you actually plan for the future. Because that agility and that curiosity, that mix will actually be quite beneficial for anybody in the future.
Richard, I think we needed not half an hour, we needed a day on this. It was a few more minutes. Oh, there's a question just here with this gentleman. Can we get the mic, this gentleman?
Hiya. So many executives have been through bad experiences in aligning strategy with an IT investment. How do we change that mindset or deal with the governance or processes? There are loads of people who will be using legacy finance systems and thinking that it is not worth making a big change for upsetting everything. How do we change this?
So, I guess that was one of my biggest questions when I started to talk to the product team out in the US and people who stood at the beginning of the financial solutions of Workday, is why would we change the systems, right? And the answer was, of course, CFOs don't wake up every day with the one single thought, how can I replace my systems? So the first immediate answer has to be a cost element. So either your running costs are very high or you're having an upgrade coming soon. We have the situations with the companies like TripAdvisor, Netflix, and Candy Crush King as examples, or probably Grab, a taxi company in Malaysia, where the growth was just so huge that they just could not cope. The back office was not sustainable in any sort of way. So they didn't really have a choice but to go with something very, very different. But we also see the companies that are very acquisitive, again, they will struggle big time with the legacy system. So that's, again, something to reconsider. Where would I start? It is really about building your own awareness about the differences. And I think unless you understand the model, the architecture, the security model behind it, the service level, and I think starting with architecture and benefits and what it brings to the customers and the very short deployment cycle, I think you would start to apply this to the context of your company, and this is where you might have a different conversation, a very interesting conversation. Again, there's no one size fits all. Everybody's very different. Every situation is different. You might have invested into the infrastructure or your data centers, what have you. But again, that probably that agility, that willingness to learn all the time and challenge the status quo, I think is essential to be relevant in the new technology world.
I wouldn't change anything with Lena said. I think I would just add into it in terms of saying, before you change something, it's to have a very clear vision on where you're planning to go. Because without that, you could be changing things unnecessarily without having a clear path.
Lena, Faye, thank you so much for coming along and sharing with us this afternoon. I would encourage you to link with these ladies. I have to depart within half an hour to be in Switzerland, and seriously, I think we could do with a longer session on the technology. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.